a little funny in the air.
Nothing. We rolling.
All right, morning, brothers and sisters. Don't know how many of you might have caught the show yesterday, but we're going to pretty much go over the same slideshow, and I got a few different comments to throw in here. There she is. So we're going to culminate the series we've been doing on the lost tribes and where they are now, and primarily focusing on prophecies about Ephraim, seeing how he's the keeper of the birthright. He holds the birthright now. And for those who may not remember this, the birthright, all those promises that were given to Abraham that were passed down to Isaac and then to Jacob, Jacob handed them to Ephraim, who at the time was a Gentile, who got adopted in and placed over all of the Hebrews. Interesting, huh? So I'm going to skip through this real quick. So we're going to start here. Got to do a little review. This is Genesis 17, 5 through 7. It says, "No longer shall you be named Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you." So whenever our Jewish brothers and sisters and the time, the Pharisees and Sadducees, when Messiah was on earth during his ministry, the Jews tend to think of being the holder of all the promises to, Judah and Ephraim and everything. They seem to think that they're the holder of all these promises, and that it only applies to the nation of Israel. And they seem to forget that Yahweh promised Abraham he would be nations. Yes, ma'am.
Are you on mic 1 or 2? Uh-oh.
Is this not on?
There we go.
Ah.
I mean, I think we still got you from the other mics.
Okay, hopefully.
Yeah, because I can hear you talking out there.
All right. Well, that's because, I got a soft voice. Sorry about that. I thought I had the mic on. So we've got to remember that Yahweh promised Abraham he would be nations. And if I'm not mistaken, this is Goyim, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right. So that can also be peoples. And in the ancient time, peoples and nations were concurrent thought. And that didn't change until relatively the last 150 years, because even at the time of our founders, a nation and a people were interchangeable ideas or concepts. Then we go to Genesis 17, verses 15 and 17. It says, "Then Elohim said to Abraham, as for your wife Sarai," how do we pronounce this?
Oh, Sarai.
Sarai. "You shall not call her by the name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." So this is how we know we're not talking about the 12 tribes being nations. It's kings of peoples. Well, we know that in the Hebrew kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, it's one kingship. The scepter goes with David, with the tribe of Judah, David, and then from David to the Messiah. And as we'll see in a little bit, it continues past. The kingship continues past in the physical. But there's one other thing I didn't put in this slideshow we have to remember. Who else was promised to become a great nation? Ishmael. And how many princes were going to come from Ishmael? 12. That's a big deal, because when you look at the prophecies over Ishmael, he's going to be stubborn, and he's going to be combative, and he's going to have his arm raised against everybody. And he's the progenitor of what's now known as the Arabs. An Arab in Arabic, it means it does not mix. So whenever they don't have somebody else to fight, this is why the Arabs are always fighting themselves. It was a prophetic utterance over top of their people. So that nature is going to be with them forever. Now, a little more review before we keep going. Genesis 35, 10 through 12. "Elohim said to him, your name is Jacob, or Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." So he called him Israel, or Yisrael. Elohim also said to him, "I am Elohim Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a multitude of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from you. And the land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you." Well, the Hebrews have never fully occupied all the land that was given to Abraham. So that's still, unless we've misread something, and I don't think we have, that's still a prophecy that is yet to have its ultimate fulfillment. But the big thing here is Jacob, the man Israel, is going to be a multitude of nations. When did Israel ever become a multitude of nations? Because it did. And that's the whole point of this series. Finally, Genesis 48, 17 through 20. When Joseph saw that his father placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head, or Menashe. Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people," which can be translated nation, "and he also will be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them that day, saying, "But you, Israel, will pronounce blessing, saying, may Elohim make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." And so he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Now that multitude of nations actually says fullness of the Goyim, which is in the same thing as fullness of the Gentiles in Paul's section of Romans. I think it's Romans 11. So, and also in Jeremiah, you'll see that Ephraim is going to be the fullness of the nations. That's because Ephraim holds the birthright. So if Gentiles are going to be grafted into the house of Yahweh, into the kingdom, they have to come through Ephraim. And Ephraim is now the head of the tribe of Joseph. The tribe of Joseph is now the head of all of Jacob's clans. So if you want to come into the kingdom now, under the new covenant at least, you have to come in through the house of Israel. That's the reason for this study. Where is the house of Israel? Where did it go? Well, here's one of the first clues of what's going to happen. Genesis 49:22. Joseph, which now we think of Ephraim as the head of Joseph, but also Manasseh, is a fruitful branch by a spring. Its branches hang over a wall. So Isaiah 5:7, for the vineyard of Yahweh of armies is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his delightful plant. This image of Israel as a vineyard echoes all the way through Scripture. If you'll remember, there's a story that Yeshua tells in the Gospels. He says a certain man builds a vineyard, and he puts a wall around it, and he digs a well. Then he puts his servants in charge. And he goes off on a long trip, or whatever. This is another indication that we're in the kingdom. He set up his kingdom, the vineyard. He put his servants in charge. That's the believers. The vineyard, the plant is the peoples and everything. The well is the word of Yahweh. So that's the water, the water of the gospel, the water of the word. That imagery is all there in the vineyard. Well, Joseph's going to go over the wall. The wall was the hedge of protection. In that, you're going to have a dual imagery. When Joseph goes over the wall, he goes outside of the hedge of protection. What happens to the house of Israel? It's given a divorce, is it not? So since Joseph is the head of the house of Israel, that's going to get you thinking this way. Well, Joseph went over the wall. He's outside of Yahweh's hedge of protection. That's because he's been put outside the camp. But it also means he's going to spread outside of the camp into the different nations, into the wilderness. This is why I do concept study over word study. This is going to connect you to the woman that's carried off into where? The wilderness. Okay, well, that's outside of the camp. The wilderness is outside the camp. If you're doing word study, Yahweh help you to put all these things together. If you're doing concept study, easy peasy. So before we get going on tracing the tribes, do we have some intentional confusion here? Or do we have elements of truth in some things? Are the Native Americans Israelites, Hebrews? And this is a Hebraic understanding. I took the picture from a slideshow. Yeah, I believe they are. But not like the Mormons would think us here. There's very good reason to believe that they are going to be, at least some of these peoples are descendants of what we would think of as the lost tribes. Like Brother William likes to point out, Seminole Indians have a song that clearly says Yahweh. It's in it. If you've ever heard the song, they're singing to Yahweh. But you're also going to find that it wasn't just peoples that looked like this. There were a tribe of Native Americans who were tall and they were reported Mammonites or Mamorites or something like that. They were in the Missouri area, and they got pushed up into the plains in the northwest toward the mountain states, and eventually got killed off by disease. But they were said to have been tall, very fair-skinned, with blonde and red hair and blue eyes. That doesn't match what we think of as what we, the darker red-skinned Native Americans, who, by the way, if you've ever known Native Americans, they don't look like that. At least none of the Chippewa or the Sioux or the Seminoles that I have known, or the Iroquois or the Algonquins that I knew when I was growing up. None of them looked like that.
I said, or the Cherokee. None of them look like that.
None of them look like this. They're not even really, they're coppery colored because they're out in the sun all the time.
Right.
And I take on the exact same color when I'm out in the sun.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Comment from Amy Gast.
Yep.
The Mississippian people have the same in their language.
Mm-hmm. I believe it. But we also have this going on in the world, who are the Black Hebrews. And there's two schools of thoughts here. One is that there are some Hebrews that were pushed over toward the Mediterranean islands and everything, and that they have a Hebrew lineage, and that some of it goes down into the Somali area and everything. And I'm not going to doubt this. That if you read into that storyline, I agree with. I'll go with it. But then you also have the idea that all Hebrews were black-skinned people, and this comes from modern Black Power movements in the United States, and I will dismiss that readily. I'll just throw that one out the window. But the idea that some of the Hebrews had darker skin, I got no problem with that, and I'll explain why in a minute. And finally, you have this little argument: who the heck are the Ashkenazi Jews? A lot of people like to claim that they're fake Jews or false Jews, and these are your light-skinned, red-headed, and other colored, hair-colored people, but also the Jews of Europe. And I've looked into this one a little bit. It seems to be that what happened is, as the Hebrews were expelled after the fall of the temple, and they get the diaspora, and they get expelled into the world, they come up through the Caucasus Mountains areas where the Northern Kingdom had already been dispersed, and they run into the Ashkenazis. And the king of the Ashkenazis calls and this is later, this is 700, 800, 900 AD. And he calls the Jews, he calls the Christians, and he calls the Muslims in, and he says, okay, give me your stories. And he decides to go with the Jewish storyline. So his people become Jewish. And this is what I've heard, that's the origin of the Ashkenazis. And then from there, they migrated into Europe from Eastern Europe, and a group of them goes all the way over to Spain, and they disperse from there. These are primarily the Jews that Hitler went after in World War II. So what's the big deal about that? Well, it's very likely that the Ashkenazis were remnants of the Northern Kingdom to begin with. So who are they going to more likely recognize with? The Torah-keeping Jews, or the morphology of the common-day Christian at that time that was in that area? What would be known as the Russian Christian Orthodox Church. And it's already starting to turn apostate at that time. They would have rejected the Muslims out of hand. But if they are the descendants of the lost tribes, they're naturally going to see their brothers. And we'll get to more of that. That seems to work. So here's the deal. And we'll get to this in a minute with genetics, but genetically, this can all be explained. And part of the problem we're going to have with seeing this spiritually is because we live in a world that's been racially charged. And that's the work of the enemy. And it started with Marx, because the idea that the political weaponization of race and slavery in this country, it's been around for a long time, don't get me wrong, but it was weaponized, politically weaponized in the 60s by the Russians, who are Marxian. And Marx was a racist. Remember his book, something of the species or whatever. If you've ever seen the subtitle, it's talking about how the whites are superior. Marx was a white supremacist. Karl Marx was a white supremacist racist. So, Missing Links Discovered. This is a book I got a hold of years ago, and I read it. And there's a cuneiform that was found in archaeological digs, a Syrian tablet. And it records where the lost tribes were sent. Now, here's what I have, and for differences of interpretation. If you're just a regular quote-unquote scientist today, what we might think of as a secular person, a scoffer in our language. You don't believe in the Bible. Archaeology is nothing more than interpretation. You have to guess at what it means most of the time. You have two options, or a lot of times you can do a biblical or a non-biblical option at looking at this. If you do the non-biblical option at looking at this, you're going to run into things like, the Hittites, that was just a myth in the Bible. They never, we found them. Things like this. They're going to say, well, the Hebrews are never mentioned in Egyptology. That's just crap, we found them. Yahweh's just a myth. He was never, crap, we found him too. So all these things they'll keep telling you aren't in the Bible. They keep finding over and over again. But you're never going to see those finds broadcast in academia. You have to go to Christian sources to see where the publications for this. But in this case, the Assyrian tablet told us where the northern kingdom was dispersed into this. This is a nation. Parthia will eventually be taken over by the Medo-Persians, but this nation plays a big role in keeping everybody separated at this point in time. But the Scythians, that orange area right in this borderline, is where the northern kingdom was first dispersed. And there's a prophecy that tells them that they will eventually, they'll take possession of the gates of their enemies. So that's got multiple meanings there. So as you take this region, over time, the captives become the rulers and they take over the people. Now, when you look at the secular history, they'll tell you the Scythians came from out east and they're going to be precursor to the Huns. And they'll say they have nothing to do with biblical people. And Paul mentions the Scythians. And they're said to be a barbaric people because they don't settle down. They're nomadic. Well, guess what the Hebrews were during Abraham's time? They were nomadic. Okay, they're also horsemen. And the people will tell you, well, the Jews had nothing to do with horsemen. But one of the tribes' herald is a mounted horseman. One of their flags, one of the tribes, Yahweh gives them the sign of a mounted horseman. That's because if you've ever read about kings and the battles, they had mounted horsemen. The Hebrews during the time of Solomon were very powerful military, and they had very good horses. This fits. This fits. What else is the Scythians show up exactly at the same point in time as the dispersal of the northern kingdom. Exactly at the same point in time in the same region, with the same family names and the same artistic symbology and the same customs, and too much of this fits. So the world will tell you they got nothing to do with the Hebrews. And some people will say, well, Paul's condemning them. Well, be careful with that. It's probably because they're the northern kingdom. Did the Jews like the northern kingdom? Well, no, they were Sumerians. There's animosity going on at the time Paul's writing. So just keep in mind, the Scythians, this is the migration of the tribes when they get kicked out of here finally. But they're going to come across here. There's two big main areas. They're going to come across this direction up on the east, and they'll go up into Scandinavia. When they do that, they're going to have a name that's Isaac or something like that. They're going to have a name that's a derivation of Isaac. And then Scythian is also a derivation of the name of Isaac. They come through here, Caucasus Mountains. That's where they acquire the name Caucasians from a Marxist evolutionary scientist who found a skull and said, this skull's bigger than everybody else's. Look, it's in the Caucasus Mountains. These white people got a bigger head cranium, so they're superior. And that's where that crap comes from. That's all Marxian garbage. And I call it garbage. But they come up and they move over to here. They become known as the Gauls. All these people, you got to follow their migrations. And that book that I had just showed you, the Assyrian tablet book, it does that. It gives you all of the archaeology that's been found. But this is actually the second Exodus coming out. Here's the two splits of the Syrians and everything. Eskuza is a derivation of Isaac, and it means sons of Isaac in the native language. That's another one of the problems we have, is that you're dealing with different languages, so that the words don't always, like Saka, that's also a derivation of Isaac. So we might get a little help. These two books tell us about Dan. This book was written in 1880. This one here was published just a decade or so ago. This author's still alive. He lives in our area. He's in the northwest part of Florida. And he's written another book on the Celtic heraldry and how it mimics the Hebrews. These two books will tell you where the Danites were going. What I really love is both of them will tell you that they are also, the Danites are known by a different name in Greek lore, in Greek literature and writing. They're known as the Danae, D-A-N-A-E. Well, what's the name, and how do you spell the name of Dan in Hebrew? D-N. You know, using Phoenician letters. How would you spell it back then? How would you spell Danae? D-N. Okay, they're also known as the Argonauts. These are the same people. Well, the Argonauts bring you Hercules. Where would I find a super strong man in Dan, in the legends of Dan's history? Samson is a Danite. Samson was probably Hercules. Well, the first leaving is right at about the time of the Exodus. That's where they first show up in history. The problem with most modern scholars is that's about 750 years too early for the accepted date of Exodus, unless you go with the timeline that the patterns of evidence people have come up with. I lean heavily toward the pattern of evidence research because it will move the Exodus back 750 years. Oh, right, the time the Danites are leaving. So you're also going to have another time mentioned in the Bible where it says Dan remained in boats. There's a passage in the prophets about Dan remaining in the boats. And if I'm not mistaken, also with a large part of the tribes of Zebulun. About that time, Dan moves to the northern parts of the kingdom because they need more land. Well, a large part of the Danites leave at that time. And they start all over the world. And Dan is a serpent in the way, remember? He renames everything everywhere he goes. So a large part of the Danites, they head toward the east, and they go across the Black Sea and everything, and they run into the Scythians. And we have this in the written records. The Scythians and the Danites recognized each other as brothers. They realized they were kindred people. But now the Danae that left at the time of Exodus, they go to Greece. They eventually, because they know architecture, construction. Remember who did most of the building of the cities for Pharaoh? The Hebrews. So they bring all of that fancy architecture that the Greeks are known for. Have you ever noticed how the Greek architecture kind of resembles some of the Egyptian architecture? Same people. Well, they eventually get into the intelligentsia of Greece, and they take over the royal families, the leading families. Well, then you have the Battle of Troy, which is real, and that drives out a large part of the intelligentsia. They end up in Sicily and then in Rome. And they take over the intelligentsia there. They get driven out. They go to Spain. Same thing happens. And eventually they end up southwest England. And then they finally settle in Ireland. There's a second Exodus. We'll show a map of that in a little bit. But what the point is all of the royal families are seeded by the Danites and the Hebrews that are traveling with them. So this is also in prophecy. Yahweh's word says he's going to seed the world with his people. We've got some prophetic clues. This is going to be before and after the time of Messiah. Hosea 7:8. Ephraim is himself thrown about with the nations. Ephraim has become a round loaf, not turned. Thrown about can also be translated as mixed with the nations. I've seen a lot of scriptures do it that way. The key line here, Ephraim has become a round loaf, not turned. I've seen some believers say, well, that means he's burned up. Because, if you don't turn their cakes over, the cake will burn up. Well, yeah, Ephraim is burned up at this time. He's been divorced. So spiritually, he's dead. But it can also mean his story's not over. Well, at the time Hosea is writing, both are equally applicable. You can read it either or both. I take both. Deuteronomy 33:17. As the firstborn of his ox, and we all know this passage, majesty is his, and his horns are the horns of the wild ox. With them he will gore the peoples all at once to the ends of the earth. And those are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and those are the thousands of Manasseh. So Joseph, the house of Joseph, tribe of Joseph, and leadership of Israel, so Israel as well, house of Israel, northern kingdoms, going to push the people to the ends of the earth. Well, we already know about China in their day and age. They know about the Middle East and the Eastern, Asian East. That's where they get all of their spices and stuff from. But the New World isn't all that well known. They knew about it, but not as well as we now. But the ends of the earth, the people got pushed to the west to the ends of the earth, which Brother Kenyon is very good about telling us. And this is how we know they moved west. Hosea 12:1. Ephraim feeds on wind and pursues the east wind continually. Well, pursuing the east wind is a Hebrew idiom, means to be destroyed or pursue calamity or destruction. But if you're going to pursue the east wind comes from the east, blows to the west. So if you're going to chase it, that's what pursue means. You're going to head west. What happened every time Paul tried to go to the east with the gospel? Spirit stopped him, didn't it? And not just Paul, several of the others. Ephraim goes west, 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 west. Tribes in the camp. Ephraim is west. Already kind of pointing in the direction Ephraim's going to go. Judah stays in the east. That's the house of Israel in Jerusalem. And then you have Reuben is the heraldry of a man. And then you have an eagle, which is Dan. Now, if y'all remember the story of Ezekiel when he sees the wheel and he's got those 4 living creatures with 4 heads, these are the heads on those 4 living creatures. Yeah, they could pretty much have a face on 4 different sides, but I kind of wonder if what is Ezekiel's trying to describe to us is something dealing with the camp of Yahweh, Yahweh's people, throne guardians. So the green line, this is before the cross. This is before the exiles. This is before 734 BC. We know this through archaeology and other written records that there was an exile here. These people that come up through here, this is mostly, they're going to become the Druids. But I've told you this one before when we were doing Halloween. These are going to become the Druids. And then they're going to go, the Druids will come up into here in Scandinavia and Denmark and eventually into Ireland. That's how they get there. Or the people that will become known as the Druids. But they're already apostate to begin with. That's where you get a lot of your pagan ideology into both the holiday of Christmas and Halloween. These folks were from the house of Judah, and they settled here in Wales, and their language is going to eventually become Old English and will morph into the language we have now, but they also settle in Ireland. This is House of Judah carrying, I think it's not Perez, is it the other son? But carries the son of the breach with Tamar's children, the son with the red thread around his wrist. And then after the exiles, there's the migration we've seen and eventually to Americas. Amos, he says, "For behold, I am commanding, and I will shake the house of Israel amongst all nations." House of Israel, I'll shake it amongst all nations as grain is shaken in a sieve, but not a pebble will fall to the ground. Yahweh's telling us he's going to seed the world with the house of Israel, but he's going to know where they're at. He won't forget them. Back to Hosea 1, starting in verse 9. And Yahweh said, "Name him Lo Ami, because you are not my people, and I am not your Elohim." He's talking about Hosea's son. Not my people. Israel, the house of Israel, has been given a divorce. They're no longer Yahweh's people. This is, "Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted." Same promise he gave Abraham. "And in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are sons of the living Elohim. And sons of Judah and sons of Israel will be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one leader. And they will go up from the land, for the day of Jezreel will be great." So it's going to be in nations or places where nobody thinks that you're connected to the Hebrews, and eventually the people will say, well, wait a minute, you are descendants of the Hebrews. But I have a question for you. When has the house of Judah, our Jewish brothers and sisters, got back with the house of Israel, quote-unquote Christians, and appointed themselves a common leader? Spiritually, the believing remnant has done that through Messiah. But when has it happened in the physical? Where's the physical reflection of this? We're going to see where that happened. This is just more, I won't need this here. We needed that on the show. It helped better. But Ephraim and Judah. The first migrations here, and then the second migrations here. We're going to see in a minute that the stick, spiritually, the stick started being put back together at the cross. Physically, it was put back together here. And then again in Americas. We'll show you that here in a minute. DNA evidence, we've already talked about that. Haplog groups, lost tribes of Israel. People have tried to trace them using DNA. This is all human, not just biblical, tracings. if you get into this, if you start tracing the DNA, make sure you are reading somebody who's tracing the Y chromosome, the paternal father's chromosome, because that one doesn't change over the years. And if you do that, you're going to find out that those Ashkenazis are Hebrews. You're going to find out that some of the darker black, what we would think of as African Americans, especially in the Caribbean, they are Hebrews. You're going to find that the Indians, they are Hebrews. Well, how can you have so many different colored people being Hebrews? Because back in the days of the scriptures and earlier before the cross, everybody lived in one area and DNA was denser and it was richer. And you could have any color child. You could have 2 white parents and end up with a red or a black child. How often are you reading in the scriptures where who came out red and ruddy? Esau? Okay, Adam means red. He might have been a red color. The idea of a red color is connected to the tribe of Judah, which is why you have so many redheads in Ireland. Once you understand what's going on, we'll get to that in a minute. The point being, though, is once they scatter and they start mating, marrying and breeding and having offspring producing within themselves, it's isolated groups. Well, now the DNA becomes less dense and it starts producing like things. You can still have 2 white parents give you a black child and 2 black parents can give you a white child. That does still happen today. So this whole thing with race that we've got messed up with in our world, the enemy put that there to keep us from being able to do what we're doing now, hunt the lost tribes. The importance of heraldry. This is part of what we're dealing with here. This will help us track them through their migrations. These are the different flags and banners that are assigned to the tribes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but Judah is going to have primarily the lion, but this hand here, that's Zerah. That's the other twin. That's the sign of Zerah. Lion is the lion of Judah, but also David. You're going to have herald emblems like Simeon and Levi, but these are the nations you're going to see these people in: Scotland, Germany, Denmark, Ukraine, Sweden, the Netherlands for a Simeon and Levi. You're going to see Reuben. Now, he's primarily a man. He tends to be Prussia, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, in those areas, also in England. Zebulun, he's on a boat. You find him in the Netherlands, Scotland, New Zealand, Latvia, Germany, France, Belgium. And these are all the different coats of arms of those people through the years. Issachar, he's going to be Germany, Czechoslovakia, Silesia, which is in that area too. And then Poland. Tribe of Dan. Dan likes to rename things as he goes too. So like Danube, Denmark, that's literally what that means. That means land of Dan. He's going to be found in Poland, Czechoslovakia, the United States, Austria, Sweden, Germany, et cetera, et cetera. Gad, he's going to be Russia, Lithuania, Scotland, Denmark, Germany, France, Czechoslovakia, and places in there. He also becomes the Druids. It's where you get primarily the Druid heritage comes from is Gad. Asher is going to be Scotland, Sweden, England, Germany. And then you're going to have Naphtali. We're going to find him in Poland, the Netherlands, again in Germany and Russia. And Benjamin, he's the wolf. You're going to find him in Switzerland, Germany, and England. I don't know if you've ever seen the stained glass window of the socialists. Who the heck are they?
Oh, yeah,
Fabian socialists. They even use the same colors. A wolf in sheep's clothing. I would not, now that I'm understanding to look at things spiritually, now I would not put it past that to be an apostate part of the tribe of Dan using the wolf in the sheep's clothing. It's apostate Benjamites rather, using the same color and heraldry, pretending to be Christian when they're not. And you're going to find that a lot. You're going to find that especially with the Jews. There's a lot of what we would think of as secular Jews that are actually atheists or whatever. That's a big problem within Yahweh's people. Other spiritual clues, the scarlet thread of redemption. That's the scarlet thread around the first child. This is Genesis 38. And this is important. That's inheritance. That's inheritance. So what was Judah promised? Scepter will stay with Judah until Shiloh come. It stayed with the lineage that gave us David until the Messiah came. It will then be rejoined back to this one here, Zara. But the passage here is, moreover, it took place while she was giving birth that one baby put out a hand. And the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. So that's firstborn, according to their traditions. But it came about as he drew back his hand that, behold, his brother came out. Then she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez, which is connected to the idea of a breach. That's a breach in the inheritance line. Jeremiah 1, 9 through 10. It says, then Yahweh stretched out his hand and touched my mouth. And Yahweh said to me, behold, I put my words in your mouth. See, I have appointed you this day over the nations, over the Goyim, and over the kingdoms. Now, this could be over the peoples, north and south kingdom, and over those two kingdoms. But I got a feeling he's talking about all the nations. Why? To root out and tear down, to destroy, to overthrow, to build, and to plant. Jeremiah's ministry is to tear down, overthrow it, and plant it somewhere else. This is echoed 3 times in the book of Jeremiah. It'll give you the impression of tear down and move, overthrow and plant somewhere else. Pick it up, put it down somewhere else 3 times. We're going to see where he does that. But first, if you go into it, you're going to find this little book is a book of traditions in Glastonbury. And it talks about, it's the silent years of Yeshua, between the ages of 12 and 30. It's an examination of historical records concerning Joseph of Arimathea, the great uncle of Yeshua, as a provincial Roman senator and metal merchant. The metal merchant is because we know he was a Darius. He is a governor over Roman mines, metal mines. He has authority throughout all of Rome. You ever wonder why he was able to just march in and talk to Pontius Pilate and say, hey, I want the body of Jesus, of Yeshua? What other Hebrew do we know of in Scripture that can do that? Unless you're Sanhedrin, you better not try that. You could get yourself killed. But why would Joseph be able to do it? Because he's a Roman citizen. He's a Darius. You can't be a Darius without being a Roman citizen. So he may have well been a senator. But if he's a Roman citizen and a Darius, he's very rich and he's very well educated. So it was rumored that he owned many of the merchant ships that came to England from Rome and Phoenicia to barter for metal and other goods. Well, we're going to know in a little bit from what we know from those other 2 books with the Danites. David, one of the things I didn't mention to you, the King David, he was collecting materials so that his son could build the temple. They found an empty mine in the northeastern sections of the Great Lakes of Michigan area that has markings carved in the rocks. And what's really interesting about these markings is they're in 3 different languages. Same thing, 3 different languages. The first is Phoenician, the second is Paleo-Hebrew, which is going to be ancient Hebrew before the exile to Babylon. So that's going to be from the time of David and Solomon. And then the other one, I forget what language it is. But we find these markings all throughout, always in this group of 3, all throughout the United States. We even find Israelite coins from the time of David and Solomon in the United States. We find these markings in the western states, out in the desert areas. So what that suggests is the Danites, the Phoenicians, and Zebulon, they knew about the North and South America, and they were here looking for minerals, metals. So it would make sense that Joseph of Arimathea would have these boats. Well, why? King David, what line? Judah, house of David. Joseph of Arimathea, what line is Yeshua? House of David, Judah, house of David. Joseph of Arimathea is going to be what? He's going to be Judah, house of David. Well, that just makes sense. He's part of the royal family, folks. So, and it says, does Yeshua accompany his uncle? Well, in the book, you're also going to find records that the little boy who shows up. By the way, they say he has red hair. That's House of David if you do your homework. But he also shows up with the woman Miriam. Well, that was probably his mother. Why would they have gotten him? Why would they have wanted to get him out of the Holy Land until his ministry started? Because it would have been very easy for him with what he knew as he was growing up to got himself killed by the Pharisees before his ministry even got going. Just thoughts, folks. I can't show you this now because I don't have this set up, but here's the thing. Jeremiah, in the scriptures, we're told Jeremiah is taken out of the Holy Land and he's sent to Egypt. And we're told he brings some of the trappings of the temple, some of the temple, furniture, fixtures, and things, and relics. And he also brings the king's princesses, his daughters. Tia Tephi, Brother William brings this up from time to time. She's the oldest of the two daughters. He brings her with him. We can trace this passage through Irish records. First he goes to Egypt, then he goes to Tunis, and then from there to Rome, and from there to South Wales, and he settles in Ireland. This is where the kingship of Ireland is set up under Zara. And Tia eventually remarries him. That's who she marries, is the descendant of Zara, the royal descendant. So the prophet Jeremiah and the king Zedekiah's daughters in Ireland, Ireland's coat of arms with King David's harp in Zara's hand. This will match them, but also in the poetic book of Tephi and in Irish records. Ireland records the arrival of the prophet, his scribe, and the princesses. And they describe the princesses as being red-haired. That's the line of David there, folks. If you're thinking biblically, so far all of this lines up. It's got things in Scripture that support it. You got the flag of Ireland, uprooted and planted once. Remember I told you he uproots and plants 3 times? From there it moved to Scotland, uprooted and planted a 2nd time. From there it moved to England, uprooted and planted a 3rd time. Gives you the United Kingdom of England. And there's the royal crown's heraldry. The bull, Ephraim, right? Well, that's technically supposed to be a bull. Ephraim becomes known as with the unicorn because of a mistranslation of the Hebrew word bullock. And then that's their secondary, and the 3rd is that's actually a Capricorn because he's double bounty, double fruitful. That's what Ephraim means. But you also have the lion. That's Judah, the crown lion of Judah. The crown is the crownship of David. And all of these symbols here work. I know this is a bad scan, but even their the model down here means God in my birthright. Why would England be wanting to yak about birthright? Well, this used to be known as Britain, which is a derivation of Brit people of the covenant. And then their other motto, meaning evil to him who evil thinks, which is a derivation of curses he who curses you. This is Israel. This is the heraldry of Israel. We chose, the 2 houses chose a leader, the King of England. Now, if you know the prophetic nature of these people, Israel, you're going to get a king that's going to say, hey, I want to force labor and tax you to death. And what does the Northern Kingdom do when Solomon's son does that? See you later, Jack. Well, guess what happens? We have a revolt and we leave Israel over the exact same, we perfectly mirror the prophetic patterns. This is one of the things that is claimed to have come with Jeremiah and the scribe. This is the stone of destiny, also known as Beth El in the Bible, house of El. That's Jacob's stone that he rested his head on. If you read the Bible closely, this stone stays with him. It's in the Exodus. It's there. The Bible tells us about this. And the book of Hebrews tells us that this is the stone that was struck in the desert. Now, I know that patterns of evidence find this big stone out in Mount Sinai area in Saudi Arabia where it's split down the center, and they think, well, that split the stone and everything. Maybe. But if you notice, if you have this on a pillar out in the desert, and notice it's got 2 rings for carrying it, if the water just mysteriously sprouts up from this little trough, it'll flow out of both corners. Well, if you want to give water to the people, you put it on a pedestal and it just flows like a fountain. If I split a rock that's on the ground and the water comes up out of the ground, how do I pick that up out of the ground spreading out into the desert? It's not too easy. Animals could lap it up, but the people would have to drink this way. You can't cook that way. You can't use it for washing, cleaning. I don't know. I do know that this now sits in the coronation throne of the King of England, the King and Queen, the royal family of England, and that every King of England or Queen has been coronated in that chair with that stone underneath it. If you read the rabbinical literature, that's exactly what David, if this is that stone, David was coronated on that stone, according to the rabbis. Do what you want with that. I tend to think there's probably something to it, especially since there's Hebrew writing on this. Paleo-Hebrew. So if it's a forgery, somebody knew to forge it back in the 11th century. Because that's how long they've had solid custody of this, that we have a recorded history of it. Then we have these things. John Bull. Ephraim's logo is the bull. That's the English equivalent of Uncle Sam. His name is John Bull. The bull is going to push the people to the ends of the earth. Well, England did that. Pushed people all over the place. Back to the scarlet thread. It's tied to salvation and redemption, British naval tradition. Since the time of Admiral Nelson, the British have woven a red scarlet thread through all of their naval robes. We may not, we might say, well, that was just so that they knew that it was an official naval rope, and if you got caught with it, without proper documentation, they knew you were stealing and things like this. When you start learning to look at things spiritually, through spiritual eyes, you start realizing that these symbols occur whether you understand what they mean or not. The spirit world does, and it works through you. They're flags. This is another one we have a hard time talking about because of, rate, whatever. But Jacob's crossed arms, that actually is part of this. That's the symbol of the Tav, which means strong covenant or promise, strong promise or covenant. And the T, that's a modern Tav. This is an ancient Tav, modern Tav, which would resemble the cross. That's one of the very first flags of the United States of America. The first naval ensign of America is a white banner with a Christmas tree on it, which is at that time, it was a Christian symbol, and it said, "In God we trust." That's going to be Ephraim and Manasseh again right there with the Tav and the 13 stars, meaning the 13 tribes. You still have the same colors. These can all be traced back. The scarlet thread and the blue and white of Israel. So the blue and white of Israel, you add the scarlet thread, which will take you to where? What is the scarlet thread? Don't we have a song in our repertoire, or is that the silver thread? But still, right. there is an old hymn that's called the Scarlet Thread. I know of that one. I've heard that one before. Why? The scarlet thread is going to be tied in the Hebrew mind to inheritance with the breach, but it's also going to connect you to the idea of redemption of sin on the cross. So you put the people back together. Heraldry of Joseph, with the bull, and is Joseph's son Ephraim the bull and the cornucopia and everything. And then also you're going to have the olive branch and the bow and arrow for Benjamin. Right here's the presidential seal. The big thing here is you got the phases of the moon as symbol of the matriarch Rachel, mother of Joseph. And you have the stars, the 13 stars represent the whole family of Israel, and you got the rays of the sun. That's Joseph's dream right there. So if Joseph's the head of the house of Israel, that's Israel born up on eagle's wings. That's an Exodus. This is a spiritual symbolism of the Exodus. The olive tree, everybody will say, well, this means the United States is Manasseh because the arrows and the olives. Well, Manasseh is also a bow with the arrow. There's no bow here. Israel is also known as a figure, as an olive tree or a fig tree from time to time. So, yeah, you probably have Manasseh symbolry here because you got Joseph's and Ephraim's symbolry up here. But this is also going to link me to other things. Israel, I'm going to take the bow of Judah and fill it with the arrow of Ephraim. That logo right there, when you understand the symbology that's in the prophet's language, that's the house of Ephraim, house of Israel led by Ephraim. There's Joseph's dream right there, but it's also going to be the way they've done the moon. This time it looks like a cloud with the fire of the sun. Well, where do you get a cloud and a flame that leads you? That's the pillar of fire and flame before the tribes in the desert, which is one of the original suggestions that both Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson wanted for this country. Both of them suggested that, but they got beat down in Congress. There we go. Exodus 19:4. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. He brought us, Ephraim, the descendants of the house of Israel, to himself. Remember, Ephraim is promised a land or actually he's promised lands, vineyards. So everywhere in Europe where they started to settle and it became Christian, those are vineyards for those tribes. But eventually they all settle here in the United States. Where is the largest concentration of Jews outside of the nation of Israel? It's the United States. Where's the largest concentration of Jews within the United States? New York City. What was New York City at the time of our founding when Washington promised and made a covenant with us and Yahweh? Capital was New York City. We're Ephraim. 48 states before the 47 47 when we recognized Israel and Israel started to ascend as a nation and Ephraim started to wane when we started to turn apostate. We were only 48 states at that time, the continental states, 48 cities. That tells you that you're connected to the Levites. Well, there's no Levites anymore. That means you're connected to the priestly order, which is now the order of Melchizedek. So it tells you you're a nation of priests. Say, well, Ephraim is going to be a company of nations. Unlike England, which was a single kingdom that had vassal states, this nation is a federation. A federation is a loose association of independent countries. Our states are independent, even to this day, even though we don't act like it, the states are sovereign. The founding fathers said sovereign. In other words, each state is actually a country. We are literally a commonwealth, a company of nations. We started out as 12 colonies. We split because the Carolinas were too big for them to take care of. The symbolry, I've seen a lot of people, dollar bill, said that's all pagan symbolry. Well, it also has biblical background as well, if we want to read it that way. Remember Genesis 22, 16 through 17? It says, and then said, by myself I have sworn, declares Yahweh, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. So eventually, the gate, you're either going to defeat your enemies, which that has happened. Yahweh's people tend to win in their battles. Or it means you will also possess the avenues of trade, the routes of trade throughout the world. It can mean both. It's been interpreted both ways. Well, over the last century or a couple centuries or so, either England or the United States, and today both, predominantly have occupied all of the areas of trade throughout the world, especially since we're a seafaring nation. Here's another one, Hosea 11, 9 through 10. It says, I will not carry out my fierce anger. This is far in the future from Hosea. I will not destroy Ephraim again. Okay, this is going to take us to Isaiah 9 and the Harbinger. He's given us the same warning, but he's telling us, and we've repeated the same things that Ephraim did, but he tells us here, he's not going to destroy us again. Folks, this is a blessing here. This means that we're not going to be destroyed again. He says, for I am Elohim, not man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. They will walk after Yahweh. We will return to Torah and will roar like a lion. Indeed, he will roar, meaning Ephraim and Yahweh here, and his sons will come trembling from the west. Jerusalem, DC. So if you want to go straight west, you got to go through the top of northern Africa. But if you go just a little bit of an angle, you got that little bit of land, but you hit Gibraltar, which is the exit of the Mediterranean, and you end up in DC. And not too much higher north would put you in New York. That, to an ancient mind, would be west. Micah 5, I can't read that here because I don't have it, but Micah 5 talks about this same stuff. Talks about there's going to be a time when Israel is in great trouble, and he's going to have 7 shepherds stand up, and they'll be led by 8 princes. Well, this is the best map I could find for it. This is the 6 nations of Great Kingdom of England. They only have Northern Ireland now because Southern Ireland broke away, which is again going to be Israel and Ephraim Manasseh's, Israel and Judah's fighting. But New Zealand and Australia, England, Scotland, Ireland, Canada, that's 6. The United States is 7. 7 shepherds with Israel, 8. It matches the prophecies. Why just these folks? Because that's Israel, and we are the seed of Ephraim and Manasseh now, the seed of Joseph, the seed of the house of Israel, but probably the combined the combined Israel moved from there to here. So that Israel right there is the Holy Land. And don't get me wrong, Jerusalem is his footstool forever. But you also have to understand that Israel is his people wherever they're at. I'm not talking about replacement for the Holy Land. I'm not talking about replacement theology. I'm talking about the prophecy that says the house of Israel will be given a land where it can rest and regain its strength and sing again as it did in its youth. Return to its original love, Yahweh and Yahweh's teachings, his Torah. That's the movement you and I are part of, brothers and sisters. You are part of the fulfillment of living prophecy. But the same prophecies tell us that there will be a second Exodus, and we will be brought back to the land of our forefathers. So at some point in time, something's going to happen here. And the Micah also talks to us about that at the time these shepherds stand up to lead Israel, we're going to be under attack by the Assyrians. Islam. Is this nation under attack by Islam? England's all but dead. This is no longer a Christian part of the world anymore. Because Europe's dead. Islam's taken it over. Islam's taken over England. Islam is starting to take over Canada. We're fighting it here now. They've got a big problem with it down there. We're under attack by the Assyrian. What did Isaiah 9 tell the northern kingdom who was going to attack and destroy the northern kingdom? Assyria. The prophecies are returning. This is why it's important to study Ephraim. I have a question for you. A lot of us came out of different churches. When they studied prophecy, all they wanted to study is when you're going to get raptured. How many people ever talked to you about the prophecies dealing with the house of Israel and Ephraim? You all know that there's more prophecy about that in your Bible than there is about the rapture and the second coming? The second coming is connected to the second Exodus, which is connected to the story of the house of Israel. Why would that be? Well, if we're thinking like a Hebrew, because that's where the inheritance is. So all of Yahweh's promises he made to Abraham are fulfilled through the house of Israel, which is led now by the tribe of Joseph, which is Ephraim and Manasseh. And that's where we're grafted into. Much more important prophecy than when you're going to get raptured out of here. Questions, comments? Did I do that okay? Did it make sense for most folks? Most of y'all in here, this is double dose for y'all. Anything on the board, Natasha? We good?
Doesn't look like it.
All right. That's all I have, brothers and sisters. Got no idea what we're doing next week. He'll give me something. He always does.